Thanks for joining us this afternoon. We're going to go ahead and get started so we can try to keep to our roughly 50 to 55 minute time zone attempt. Thanks for joining us. I'm Dave Oleyar. I'm the Director of Long-Term Monitoring and Community Science at HawkWatch International. I'm one of the scientists along with Jesse Watson. You want to say hi, Jesse?
Yeah, hi folks. Thanks for being here. My name is Jesse Watson. I'm a research biologist with HawkWatch International.
We oversee HawkWatch's migration network, which is what we're going to spend time talking about today. And I don't know about you, Jesse, but I sure wish this is the time of year where we spend a lot of time, usually up on a ridgetop and out visiting crews and visiting migration festivals across the West where our network is. And it's one of those years where we've had to not operate at a lot of sites, and we'll talk about that in a second. But it's weird to be in the office right now.
I'd rather be staring at the sky than the screen.
Yeah, but it's exciting to be able to do a seminar series like this. And so this is the first of a 6 seminar series about migration and Raptor ID. And we hope that if you're joining today, that you enjoyed it enough to join some of the other sessions. And we'll talk about migration and Raptor ID. So let's go ahead and get started. If you are unfamiliar with HawkWatch, this is your first time joining us, we're a nonprofit based in Salt Lake City. We operate in the West, but we have research projects across North America and globally in Africa. We have a couple projects on vultures and eagles. But our mission is conservation of the environment through education, long-term monitoring, and scientific research on raptors as indicators of environmental health. And we do all the work we do through supportive membership and partners and all that. And so we hope that you like what you see today, and if you can, you support HawkWatch International. This is the time of year, like we just kind of alluding to, where I'm going to switch and try a video here, so bear with me, everyone. Where lots of bird species, raptors included, in North America are on their journey or are about to begin their journey from North America and their breeding grounds down to southern wintering grounds where the climate is a little more hospitable, where food is a little more abundant, and where it's easier to have a better chance of survival for the winter. And so we're right in that time of year where lots of things are moving. It's pretty exciting. And I'm going to show a graphic from Cornell Lab that shows eBird data. And I'm sure a lot of you log in and submit data to eBird, but if you don't, eBird is a community science program and app where you can basically just log any bird you see on your phone wherever you are, and you're helping collect data on bird distributions in abundance. And so the authors that are cited down in the bottom right-hand part of the screen have created these models of spatial distribution across the year for different species. And this is Swainson's hawk. This is one of our long distance migrant raptors in the West. And I'm just going to show this video because it demonstrates like what's about to happen across North America for a lot of different species of raptors quite nicely. Everything's either moving now or is about to move. You can see all the purple and the orange right here is where in September, Swainson's hawks are being recorded and have been historically recorded by eBird data. And if we get the graphic rolling, these birds are about to pour out of North America and down into South America, and that distribution data shows that really nice. And it's about to loop back up and show you, then they're going to come back up in the spring to breed, right? So we've got migration happening, and migration is a nice time of year to see a lot of different birds and species on the move, but it's also a great time of year to monitor populations. So you can imagine if you, and I'm going back to still video because the PowerPoint and the video of that nice graphic weren't working nicely earlier, so we aren't trying it in a PowerPoint. But here's that map, and you can imagine if you have monitoring sites across North America, like these 8 sites here with the HawkWatch logo, then if you've got a crew there for a set time of year, every year, year after year after year, you might learn something about changes in patterns of abundance and distribution and trends that are going on with different species, Swainson's hawks included. And so that's what HawkWatch does. I kind of alluded to it being a weird year already. So most of the sites in our network of migration sites are currently not running. The 2 sites you see circled there in green, that's the Grand Canyon and the Corpus Christi site, those are the sites where we have crews counting this year, and they are there, and we're operating at those sites because we feel pretty confidently we can have we can distance safely, we can isolate the crew, and there are medical facilities easily attainable if something should happen pandemic related during that time of year right now. So that's why we're operating those sites. We don't have that set up at our remote ridgetop sites, and unfortunately, that's why we made the tough call not to run those this season. So Hawkwatching came to the West, and HawkWatch International was founded in the early, at least the idea of HawkWatch International was founded in the early 70s, mid 70s, when Steve Hoffman, who founded HawkWatch International, came to Utah to go to graduate school at Utah State University in Logan, Utah. And Steve came from the east, where there's abundant Hawkwatch sites and hawk counting sites, including Hawk Mountain, the longest running site of the type. And he came out and decided he wanted to find and establish some hawk watching sites around the area while he was going to grad school. And he found the Wellsville Mountains, which are the northern extent of the Wasatch Range. And you can see a picture from the lookout at the Wellsvilles here. It's very steep. It was a really difficult site to access. Big elevation hike up and down every day for the counters, but he counted lots of volumes of migrating raptors here at the Wellsvilles. And while he was doing that, he counted, and he tells the story much better, so you'll get a chance to see Steve talk. I recommend it. But while he was counting, he saw many golden eagles and was astounded by the number of eagles that he was seeing, discussed and described it, and how cool it was to his advisor. And his advisor kind of chuckled and laughed it off and said, "Well, Steve, you're probably counting the same birds over and over, and those are probably just, a few birds that are riding down the ridge and then coming back up and going again, and so you're counting the same birds." And so Steve didn't want to believe that, and like any good graduate student, what do you want to do if you're a graduate student, Jesse?
You want to prove your advisor wrong.
You want to show your advisor that you know what you're talking about, right? So Steve set out to prove that they were different golden eagles, and the way to do that is through marking eagles and seeing if you catch the same one again and again and again. And so he started to look for a place to band. The Wellsvilles are not very conducive to banding due to the steep terrain, so Steve ventured west across the Great Salt Lake and the Great Salt Desert into the Goshute Mountains, which is on the border just inside the Utah-Nevada border, just inside of Nevada. And found another nice north-south running mountain range with a topography that had some flat spots that was more conducive to banding birds. And so he learned how to catch and band raptors and started doing that and catching eagles and banding to see if he would catch the same eagle again. And that's sort of how the Goshutes got started. And then, so here's a nice layout of the area in northern Utah, here's southern Idaho and Nevada. And Jesse, you want to talk a little bit about why is this area so good for concentrations of migrating raptors?
Yeah, so to kind of set the scene here, this is a map, and this border here in the middle is Nevada-Utah border. Got the Great Salt Lake here in the middle, the Wasatch Range that we're all familiar with in Utah, going north and south here. And then the Goshute Mountains are these little mountains that are running north and south in Nevada. In the fall, these birds, which are in orange, are moving south. And birds, you could argue that they're either smart or lazy. They want to work efficiently and not use more energy than they have to when they're migrating south. And
It could
they
be
don't want
both.
to fly. What's that?
They could be smart and lazy.
Smart and lazy, yeah. Maybe that's a good combination. So they don't want to fly across the Great Salt Lake because it's a lot of work. It's not very efficient. They have to flap hard and use a lot of energy. So what they do is they look for leading lines, and leading lines could be things like, in this case, the Wasatch Mountains or the Goshute Mountains, a nice north to south range that they can kind of tack along and fly as they're moving south. In other cases, it could be water bodies along the edge of the shore, and we'll talk about that with Corpus Christi when we get to it. So watch these birds moving south and see how they move as they're going south. So what you should notice is they all came from kind of a big spread out area up here, but they all funneled down to these sites. We've got the Goshute Mountains highlighted here with the star, and the Wellsville Mountains, where Steve Hoffman started counting here. And the birds kind of funnel through these areas, and then they make their way south. So it's obvious that if you went to those locations, that would be a good spot to spend time counting and observing and or banding these birds. So here's another graphic kind of explaining how these birds are tacking along the ridge. This is actually at Chelan Ridge, or sorry, Commissary Ridge. And if you look out to the left here, imagine there's wind coming in and hitting this ridge line. And what's that wind going to do? It's going to rise upward because it's going to be deflected. And so these birds essentially are surfing along this ridge and being efficient and smart. And again, maybe you could argue that they're being lazy. But I think it's a combination there. They're being most efficient, trying to preserve their energy so they can move south. Now, in addition to using the lift from the wind that hits these ridge lines, they can also use thermals. And so many people have probably seen this before. Often in the West, you'll see turkey vultures, maybe eagles, other buteo species, circling up in hot air currents, and we call those thermals. And the birds basically enter at the bottom. They find an air current that is hot, and we know hot air rises, so they'll join in the bottom. They'll circle up. We call it kettling up. Imagine like a bunch of water in a kettle. It kind of circles as it boils. That's kind of the idea. And then they get to the top, and then they just soar out for miles and miles and miles. And then as they lose altitude, they find another hot air body and they circle back up. So again, being very efficient here and preserving their energy so they don't have to work extra hard.
So the fact that those raptors use those features of the landscape, and we kind of understand that, and not only is it one species, but it's a multitude of species that kind of use the same features, that makes it pretty handy if you can identify where those locations are, like the Wellsvilles or the Goshutes or some of the other locations in the network, and station a crew there to monitor migrating raptors. So one of the ideas is, instead of, if we want to monitor raptors during the breeding season, which we do, they're spread out and dispersed across large areas, and so it takes a large group of people, a lot of vehicle time and energy and fuel to cover those areas and get a sense of raptor abundance that way, which you can do. The nice thing about migration sites and monitoring is that if you locate those points that they're all using kind of as super highways, you can station crews in those areas and very effectively and efficiently have a crew stay for a season, the same amount or window of time year after year after year, counting the same way, and get a nice index of what's going on with populations of different species that are using those highways, right? And so that's one of the values of monitoring migration at a single HawkWatch site. And then when you add up what's going on across a larger area and have a network of sites, you get a much bigger picture. The other nice thing about HawkWatch sites is it's a great opportunity to engage the public, provide experiences that resonate with people for a long time. Seeing a raptor fly by from overhead and getting to see a topside view of a migrating goshawk is amazing and impressive. Being able to see a bird that's just been trapped and banded at the locations where we band is often has a big impact on lots of people, and so that's another great value of migration sites. At the same time of offering that encounter and that close-up experience with the raptors when we do band birds, we can put bands on them or other tracking devices, and what that allows us to do is to learn about their movements, learn about migration corridors from recoveries or from tracking, and it also lets us get samples for genetics and things like that. And then the last thing that we do at migration sites that is pretty important is that it's an opportunity for future conservation biologists to get some hands-on experience that they may not be able to get in other ways. And so we're pretty proud of being able to offer that opportunity to roughly 35 people each year at our sites. We run full-time. And so we're going to take you through a quick tour of our sites. We're going to start north, like a migrant raptor might be heading south right now, and work our way south, but we're going to start at the Chelan Ridge site in Washington. And I'm going to let Jesse talk about that one because it's near and dear to him as a native Washingtonian. So tell us about Chelan Ridge, Jesse.
Yeah, and I'm looking at the chat. I see a question about wildfires and how they're affecting hawks from Mary. So I think we'll get to that later, and we'll address that. So hang on there, but feel free to ask questions in the chat, and if it's what we're currently talking about, we will address it. So Chelan Ridge, as Dave mentioned, started in the northwest as our most northwest fall migration site. It's located in the Cascade Mountains. This is a closer look. This is a ridge line running northwest to southeast, and you can kind of imagine what we just talked about, these birds tacking against the ridge line as the wind hits that to move south. This is Lake Chelan, and again, thinking about what I mentioned, if you're a bird, even though it's relatively small, it's not very efficient to fly along that body of water, not as efficient as it would be to fly up along the ridge. So I was lucky enough to grow up in Washington, and I actually was able to spend time at Chelan Ridge when I was pretty young, probably 10 or 11 years old. In around 2000, I guess that makes me about 12. So 2000, 2001, I spent some time up here and got to spend time looking at hawks and observing them and really becoming more and more passionate about uh, seeing raptor migration. And fast forward, I guess, 20 years, and now I'm talking about it. So kind of cool, full circle for myself.
You visited the site as an undergraduate student too, right, Jesse?
I did, and I think this photo is some undergrad students from Washington State University. And if it's not, we do have university groups that come and visit the site, and I actually got to do that as an undergrad student, and that still kind of continues today. And it's kind of a cool pipeline for us, where we've had students who have come on group trips to Chelan Ridge, and have then thereafter become hawk watchers on our crew. And in fact, we have someone on our staff who then became a full-time biologist on our HawkWatch International staff after kind of going through that route. So it's a great way to going that path is a great way to kind of join in and begin a career studying raptor research. So as we go through each of our sites, we've got a few things that we're going to highlight on each of these slides. So we've got our partners up in the top. We partner with the Forest Service at Chelan Ridge. And notice this little graphic on the bottom here. We're going to have this for each site, so just kind of keep that in mind as you see it. And what that means is at this site, Chelan Ridge, we count birds, count raptors. We do outreach and education, so we teach people as we're doing here in this image, and we band raptors. So Chelan Ridge kind of has the standard time frame when we count. It's a little shorter, ends a little sooner than some of our other sites because the weather gets pretty bad, but it typically starts August 25th and runs through late October. So on each of these slides, we won't hit all of these points, but just to kind of set the tone for the rest of the sites that we'll talk about, we'll have this graphic pop up. And this shows when we started counting at Chelan Ridge was 1998. So we've been running for over 20 years. The total number of migrant rabbits that have been counted. So over 40,000 birds, over a total of 10,000 hours of observation. In a typical year, we see about 1,700 raptors. And then we've got the season records and the daily records here in the years that those occurred. So the best day we've had at Chelan Ridge is 187 birds, for example. And we've banded nearly 10,000 raptors at the site, and we've had 77 biologists up and coming biologists who have got their training there and have gone on to do probably other raptor research related work. So that's Chelan Ridge.
Hey, Jesse.
Yes.
For anyone watching that may not have visited a HawkWatch before anywhere, what's the deal with that owl on the pole?
Yeah, so the owl on the pole Dave is talking about right here, we got this long pole that's at the point of the ridge, and basically you've probably all seen these. It's a fake decoy great horned owl. Looks really dark, the darkest great horned owl I've ever seen. And the point is that most raptors, including other owls, don't like large owls because they're intimidating and they're killers. Really, they're really they kind of rule the roost, so to speak. And so if you're a raptor that's flying by and you see that, it's easy to just buzz over and kind of bomb the owl, fly at it real quick and try to scare it away, and then continue migrating south. So it doesn't really cost them any extra energy, but it gives our counters a good look to help identify them, and it's pretty neat to see. Um, so as far as why you should visit Chelan Ridge, we have a few highlights for each of these sites that we point out. Chelan's a really good place to see rough-legged hawks, which is pretty neat in Washington. Lots of northern harriers and most of the other usual typical migrants that you would expect in diurnal raptors that you'd expect in the Northwest. All right, so they'll fly down to Bonney Butte, our next site that's a little bit further south. Bonney Butte, as we zoom in, is also in the Cascades. It's probably, you could make this argument about all the sites, but I always tend to think it's maybe the most scenic of our sites. It's just really tough to beat a massive volcano in your foreground. So this is Mount Hood. It's, like I said, it's also in the Cascades. I really like this site. I'm partial to the Northwest where there's lots of green, evergreen trees. And of all of our sites, though most have trees, this site has probably the largest evergreen trees. So it's kind of unique in that sense. So here's a look from the ground. Site runs a similar timeline to Chelan Ridge, a little bit later because the winters aren't always as bad. Sometimes they are. Also a Forest Service partner site, and highlighting this once again in the bottom right, we do all the same things there. We count, educate the public, and band raptors. Site has been running a little bit longer than Chelan Ridge. Since the mid-90s, we've counted nearly 75,000 raptors, over 10,000 hours of counting. Yearly count is a little bit higher, nearly 3,000 birds, and we've banded around 7,000 raptors there. Bonney Butte is the place to go see merlins consistently throughout our migration network. The highest volume of merlins are observed at Bonney Butte. So if that's a bird you want to see, that's a good place to see it. It's also a good place to go if you want to see bald eagles that are migrating down the coast or at least the Northwest. And if you're into watching volcanoes, this is a good place to go see Mount Hood. And there's actually additional volcanoes that are in the distance. So it's pretty phenomenal views. All right, Dave, I'll fly Dave over to the Bridger Mountains in Montana.
We'll travel east for a second. So if we jump over into Montana and go near Bozeman, that's where the Bridger Mountains HawkWatch is, or Bridger Mountains Raptor Watch, I think is what they're calling themselves currently. This site was started and run by HawkWatch International, and we still partner with the Sacagawea Audubon Society out of Bozeman to run and operate and analyze data from the site. And so roughly same season as Bonney Butte, August 27th through the 31st. This is at the ski area out in the Bridger Mountains, just north of Bozeman, so Bridger Bowl ski area. And this is a picture from the observation point looking north. So you can see this nice ridge line once again, a north-south running ridge line, which is one of those features in the West that's just really good for raptor migration. 28 years of monitoring at the Bridger Mountains, nearly 70,000 migrating raptors during that time counted, and 10,000 hours of observation. The yearly count average is 2,500 birds, pretty close to it, 2,483. And you can see the records here. 3,500 is the big year. The big day is 636 birds, which may not seem super high compared to some sites, but higher to others. But the kind of really touchstone and calling card of the Bridger Mountains is that it is a high volume and really important migration corridor for golden eagles. Of that 636 of that daily high, like 520, I believe, of those birds that day were golden eagles migrating. So it's by far the highest volume site in our network for seeing golden eagles and bald eagles. So it's really good for that.
Hey, Dave.
Yeah.
Before you move on, this looks like maybe a good place to talk about the wildfires. You can kind of see the smoke here at this site, and thanks, Will, for the photo that you shared. And yeah, I think they're suspended right now due to fires. But yeah, how do those fires affect, or could they affect the birds?
You're asking me?
Yeah.
Yeah. We get that question a lot, and we've been getting that question more and more in the last 4 years, 4 or 5 years, as we've started to see this increase in wildfires across the West. Um, and so I think the answer is complicated, and we don't really know the answer yet. Fire in some cases could be great for um, migrating raptors in terms of creating some uplift with the heat that's created. Fire can open up habitats that might make it easier for migrating raptors to find and hunt prey potentially. But then, these birds deal with the same issues in terms of air quality that a lot of people in the West and almost across most of North America are right now with the smoke issues. And so we aren't sure. We know that in some years when we have heavy fires that aren't right there to make us stop operations at some sites, we tend to see fewer birds, and we're working to try to kind of tinker out and suss out like how much of that is obscured visibility versus birds not coming through, and that's a hard thing to know with this kind of monitoring method. But it's something that we're thinking about and looking at, and the ability to compare like the data from the last 5 years or so where wildfires have been very prevalent to our accounts, and look and see how that might be driving is one of the next things that we'll be doing analysis wise. So it's a great question. We're working on it. You want to add anything, Jesse?
No, I think that's great.
Cool. And so that's the Bridger Mountains. If we go from Bridgers and head just south, we go to Commissary Ridge, which is the newest site in the HawkWatch International Migration Network. And so Commissary Ridge is along the Commissary Ridge mountain range, just north of Kemmerer, Wyoming. And you can see here just this nice north-south running ridge, and our count site and camp are right there. The nearest town is Kemmerer. Kemmerer is famous. What's famous about Kemmerer besides Commissary Ridge, Jesse?
The original J.C. Penney's is located in Kemmerer.
So if you're a fan of department store trivia, there you go. So here's a picture on the ground from Commissary Ridge. This is a group of visitors during one of our migration celebration days. And you can see the nice ridge line there. We're actually looking south here. So these guys, the crowd here is looking north for migrating birds. And you can see that rock structure where the chair is that becomes a wall. And that's pretty important for this site. And I'll mention it again here in just a second. But the site's been running since 2002, 18 years. In that time, 66,000 raptors and just almost 9,000 hours. And the count averages 3,700 birds a year here at Commissary Ridge. Big season is 5,600. Big day is 972, and that was in 2010. And kind of a common theme, like so that 972, like 600 of those birds were Swainson's hawks. A huge flock of Swainson's hawks came through and really bumped the number up that day. We banded at Commissary Ridge, and we banded 1,382 raptors in that time. In terms of what the site is good for, if you're into eagles, it's another great site to go to. The passage rate isn't as high as it is for the Bridger Mountains, but it's the site where we see the most bald eagles come through on migration, the most golden eagles outside of Bridgers, and it's the site where you can really determine how much wind you can take. Wyoming reputation for being windy is a real thing, and that structure on the ridge helps protect our crew from some pretty incessant and brutal winds at times, but it's a really fun site to count at and go to. You see all sorts of great wildlife. We're going to head south and west, and this bird of ours is going to say, I'm going to cross the Great Salt Lake and the Great Salt Desert and head to the Goshute Mountains. Here we are. You can see the salt flats in the Great Salt Desert there outside of Wendover, and this is the Goshute Mountains range. You can see it's just an isolated north-south running range, and if you're a migrating bird and you're looking for food, you're looking for that uplift and updraft that Jesse was talking about earlier, there aren't many places to go, so you're going to follow these little mountain ranges in this Valley Island Skyland sort of system. and go to that. And that's one of the features that makes the Goshute such a high volume site. It's the highest known volume migration site in the Intermountain West. Um, our season there runs through August 15th through November 5th. Here's a view north from observation. Counters looking, and there's great scenery any direction you want to look at the Goshutes. We started there counting in 1983, so 37 years of counting. Roughly 500,000 migrant raptors counted during that time, and that's 25,000 hours of observation. The yearly average for the Goshutes is 14,522 birds, and the big season was 25,290, and that was in 1998. We trap at the Goshutes, and it's one of our high volume trap sites too. So we've banded 67,000 raptors over the years at the Goshute. So it's a site to visit if you want stunning scenery, which applies to pretty much every one of our sites. High volumes of the usual migrants, and then high volumes of banded birds, and just a place where you feel like you're up on an island out in the middle of nowhere. If you are interested in experiencing the Goshutes next year or some year in the future, you should know that it takes an effort to get there. So it's about a 2-mile hike with 2,000 feet of elevation gain to get up to the HawkWatch site. But it's worth it, right, Jesse? So
Sorry, I muted myself. Absolutely.
that's the Goshutes. We're gonna head south from the Goshutes to the Grand Canyon now, and tell us what's so grand about it, Jesse.
All right. So the Grand Canyon is a site. Hopefully, many of you have had the opportunity to visit. It's probably the most accessible site. You can actually see the road here. There's actually a National Park Service bus in a normal season that is running right to Yaqui Point, which is where the site is located. So very accessible. You can just ride that bus out and walk right out to the site. It's a beautiful place, and it's really unique because you're counting against this backdrop of red rock. And so as far as, yeah, I say this for every site, as far as scenery goes, it's just so amazing and unique and beautiful. Really cool because birds come up the canyon in some cases, and they'll circle up, and you'll see them against that rock, and it's just really phenomenal. So we partner with the Park Service here, which is unique, given our site is in the national park. We began counting in 1997. We don't band at this site, and we've counted nearly 100,000 migrants over 11,000 hours of monitoring. We have an average count of around 5,000 birds, a season high of 7,000 birds, and a daily total of 715. And actually, you can go online now and check on hawkcount.org, where we will post our daily numbers get pushed to there as we're counting right now. And actually, over the last few days, our crew there has seen 100 plus to several hundred birds. And so birds are starting to move through in good numbers right now. So we have 3 crew members probably sitting in pretty much exactly these spots right at this moment, hopefully counting hundreds of hawks flying by.
They're probably 6 feet apart, though, right?
Yes, probably 6 feet apart. So this is an amazing site, of course. If you want to see the Grand Canyon and you're into that type of thing, you can't beat it. You get all the usual migrants, and you can see California condors, which is unique, of course, really in the world, but among our Hawkwatch sites, this is probably the only place that you're going to see them and really see them daily. And if you spend enough time there, you can actually get acquainted with individuals. You can read or photograph their tags on their wings and know who you're seeing over the course of the season, which is cool. There's also local zone-tailed hawks, which is pretty phenomenal. So they breed in some of the canyons, and you can get good looks at them, which is pretty neat. All right, so we'll fly east now over to the Manzano Mountains in New Mexico. Manzanos are in this range here, southeast of Albuquerque. So within a couple hours of the city of Albuquerque, you actually have to drive through this pass and back around to get there. And Manzanos runs the same time frame as the Grand Canyon, August 27th to November 5th. It's a Forest Service partner site. So this is from the lookout, looking out to the flats to the west. Albuquerque would be up this way. And it's one of our more long-term sites. We've been counting there for years and years, since the mid 80s, so 35 years. In total, I've counted nearly getting close to 200,000 raptors, over 20,000 hours of monitoring. 5,000 is, or 5,210 is the yearly average, so pretty good volume of birds there. This one's kind of neat because the season total, you can see, is double what the average is, 11,895 in 1993. And that total, season total, is actually driven by a huge count in a single day, which is 5,195 birds. And like Dave was mentioning, that was a huge Swainson's hawk flight. Imagine looking out and seeing 5,000 birds come through. And I've been told that it was towards the end of the day, and there were 3,000 more birds the following day that came through. So over the course of a few days, they counted 8,000 birds of one species. So pretty mind-blowing. And outside of Corpus Christi, that is the biggest flight that we've had in a single day at any of our sites. We've banded over 23,000 raptors at this site, and we did get a question about how we band raptors, and I think we'll save that to the end. So we'll get back to that question then. All right. So we'll fly our longest journey all the way down to the coast to Corpus Christi, and Dave will give us a tour there.
Well, that was a long way south. It's good to be at the coast now, but these birds are going to keep going. And so we'll take a zoom in look at Corpus Christi. So our Corpus Christi Hawkwatch is located just outside of Corpus Christi, the city, in Hazel Baysmore County Park, which is a county park in the county there where Corpus lives. It's Nueces Park. And you can see it's along the coast, but kind of inland. And we talked about things that focus and concentrate migrating raptors in terms of ridgelines and looking for that updraft or those thermals. Really thermal driven flight here at Corpus because there's not a ton of topography for updraft here, but also a leading line effect in terms of the coast being there, the coastal bend, and the fact that we've got migrating birds from the west and the eastern part of North America that are now starting to get funneled in because the landmass in North America is tapering once we start to get here. So we start to get concentrations of birds. And so we get species from and individuals from the west, but also from the east. And a couple of eastern species really drive the count here in terms of broad-winged hawks and Mississippi kites. The Corpus Christi Hawkwatch, here's a picture of the platform from the count site in the park. And so this platform was a game changer when it went up. It offers some shade for the counters. So all the other sites that we've talked about so far, the crews get they get heat, they get dirt storms, they get fog, they get smoke, they get snow, they get sleet, they get everything. Corpus doesn't necessarily get the cold weather, but what they do instead is they get the abundance of the warm, humid, muggy weather and associated bugs. So the platform gives them some shade, and it gets them up off of the ground and away from the mosquitoes, and it makes for a nice place for visitors to spend time watching the count in a normal year when visitors can go there. Right now, this season, we've got restrictions on platform access for just the crew and like a few volunteers that are local that come every year in terms of trying to reduce contact points and distance appropriately. So visitors can watch the count here at the park, but not from the platform this season. We've been counting here since 1997. 23 years, and in those 23 years, and this is why you come to Corpus Christi for one of the reasons, is they've counted 13,608,067 exactly migrating raptors during that time. There's probably some wiggle room there, and I'll show you a picture of a flight coming through in a minute, and you'll understand why. But 13 million raptors in 17,000 hours of counting. That's like 20 plus raptors per hour, which is an impressive volume. The average year is 500,000 raptors. The big season was just over 1 million birds came through, and it's kind of the same story that Jesse just told at the Manzanos. Is that record got boosted by one single big day with over 500,000 broad-winged hawks that came through and doubled the average count essentially. So that would have been an exciting day to be on the platform for sure. So the view you come to Corpus is not to see the platform, but to look up from the platform and see this. This sky full of broad-winged hawks. This is a sky full of like ridiculous amount of raptor biomass up there. It is awe-inspiring to see and experience in real life. So if you get a chance to go see something like this at Corpus, or there's a site in Veracruz run by one of our partners, Pro Natura, where the flight is even bigger, and it's mind-boggling how many hawks are in the sky at one time. So big flight, big volumes at Corpus Christi. The other thing that is unique to this site is you can see a lot of species that are kind of coastal species and at the northern extent of their range in some cases. So we get good flights of swallow-tailed kites. Mississippi kites is our second most counted species there at the site. White-tailed hawks, zone-tailed hawks, crested caracaras, and the occasional plumado falcon, and then they had one come through this year too. And so it's a pretty fun site to visit. They're counting now, and they're already up over 100,000 birds for the season. I don't know where they're at today. I don't know if we might check in if we've got time later and see. But it's the last site in HawkWatch International's network of Western sites. And so we covered this broad geography. And to have sites in a lot of areas like this, and I think I alluded to it before, lets us start to identify big trends in raptor species. And so we might be interested in what's going on just at Chelan Ridge in terms of numbers of total raptors or a single species. But when we can look and see trends across a whole lot of different sites, that can be pretty informative to large scale conservation efforts and tell us where we should pay attention. And we're going to kind of go through some examples of how we can look at that. I think Nicole shared in the chat a link to our 2019 network report. If you're interested in exploring this information and seeing some great pictures of raptors more in depth, you can download that PDF and check it out. We're pretty proud of it. This is a table that is just summarizing last year's flight, so the 2019 flight. And I'm not going to go through all the details, but we can look in a single year at a single site or across all our sites and say, was the site or was the year, an above average year or below average year for a given species? And so the numbers you see here in red are those counts that were below average at a site for that species, right? And the green are above average for that site, and black is within the confidence range of average count across the years. And so in 2019, we counted for, at the network sites, for 4,998 hours. And saw 630,389 migrating raptors. And so that's interesting. We also counted at 2 pilot sites, and those are reported in the annual report too. So if you're interested in Cut Bank, Montana, or Kluane, Yukon, you can see what our crews there saw too. But we're going to just talk about the long-running network sites right now. So there's that data in tabular form. So we've got that year's worth of count data. We can do that year after year after year if we're at a site for the same time, and that's what this page shows. And this is just for all raptors combined, right? So this is total raptor count. So if you go to the Bridger Mountains for that year and count for 100 hours, this is the number of total raptors you're likely to see, a rate. It's a passage rate, right? And so our crews in 2019 spent all of those times, 300, 400 hours of observation time at a single site, looking at Mount Hood at Bonney Butte, so that we could get one more point on this long-term time series graph to see what's going on with either all raptors in this case or some individual species, which we'll show you a couple examples of trends for individual species here just in a second. But so we work really hard in the season to get one more dot on this long-term story of what's going on with raptors at a site, and we can look at that across a whole lot of sites. And you see the map of the Western US here. And so you can see if there's really no change, there's no trend at Commissary Ridge or Goshutes for what's going on with raptor species. And then like down arrows are a declining trend. So overall decline in total number of raptors that we see at Chelan Ridge over the years. And that's what this graph shows. And that's just depicted by a down arrow here. And if we had any increases, it would be an up green arrow. And you'll see that for some species, right? So this tells us a big story of what's going on in the West across our network with raptors. And so that's kind of how you interpret these pages. I think Jesse's going to talk to us about red-tailed hawks next, right?
Yeah, so I just happened to pull it up, and in Corpus Christi, they've seen 15,000 broad-winged hawks today in count. So again, you can check that out on Hawk Count Live and see what they're seeing. Pretty phenomenal numbers. So for red-tailed hawk, we're just going to go through a quick few examples of species that are in our report. Most people are probably familiar with red-tailed hawks. Hopefully, we've all seen one before. And if you look at the map real quick, you can see 2 sites are showing downward trends in the Pacific Northwest, and 2 sites further east, Goshute and the Bridger Mountains, are showing increases. So you can kind of see that depicted here with the downward trends of Bonney, Butte, and Chelan in the top left. And then there's an increase at the Goshutes and the Bridger Mountains. And I won't dwell on this, but you can look at these pie charts when you download the report, and you can kind of see a breakdown of which, per species, which site you'll see the highest percentage of, if that makes sense. So broad-winged hawk, 90+% of the broad-winged hawks we see are at Corpus Christi, for example. All right. So, skipped ahead. The golden eagle, here's another interesting example. This one's a little more depressing, if you will. Lots of red arrows declining, showing declines for the species in the west, which, if you're familiar with a lot of the research that's going on, this kind of information has been kind of used as baseline information, as kind of a jumping off point to do further investigation as to what is going on with golden eagles. So again, these single dots per year that are created by site indicate what is going on with the count, at least on migration, for golden eagles. And unfortunately, we've seen a decline in many of the sites here in the west, and that kind of rings true as well in the east. All right, Dave.
Yeah, here's one more example of so what a monitoring effort and network like this can highlight and lead to. If we look at the story of American kestrels, same story as golden eagles, and you see we have long-term kestrel declines at 7 of the 8 sites in the network here, and so that tells us we ought to pay a little bit more attention to what's going on with kestrels. And so HawkWatch has a program, research program, investigating the drivers of kestrel decline and trying to understand what might be leading these trends, and so do a lot of other groups and researchers across the country. But it's data like this that show these declines from migration sites and also from different seasons, like the breeding bird survey or the Christmas bird count, that can tell us which species and which regions we should be focusing more detailed and complex conservation efforts and research to try to understand what's going on. And so that's the ultimate utility of a long-term monitoring network, is who should we be paying attention to, and then to not leave us on a downer. Like the other flip side of that is that a network like this and these kinds of efforts can also tell us conservation success stories. They can tell us what we've done right. And so we'll end looking at data here from some peregrine falcon trends, and you can see across the HawkWatch network there's a lot of green arrows here, right? 5 out of 8 sites at above average counts last year, and 5 sites have increasing trends in peregrine falcons across the West. And so that's a nice story. That tells us that we're doing something right in terms of trying to recover this species, right? And so we do that in the West, but I think it's nice to take a even higher elevation look and look at across the scale of North America. And you can see that there are count sites all across North America in addition to the network that we operate. And you can see there's quite a few in the East, like we've talked about. But these are sites that have counted for 10 years in a standard way, at least 10 years in a standard way. And we've partnered with these sites for an effort that's called the Raptor Population Index, and I'll talk about that in just a second. But for those of you that might be somewhere in the east or central part of the continent and are interested in finding a migration site near you, if you go to hawkcount.org, That's a nice Raptor database run by Humana that basically you can find the nearest HawkWatch site that's close to you. And this is where Jesse was talking about where we push our data to um, every day so that you can see what's going on. That red arrow there shows what Corpus Christi saw yesterday, and I know that's small. That says 39,535 birds. But you can see the data that are coming in from operating sites, and you can figure out where a close site to you is if you're interested in visiting a site, right? And so the sites that submit their data to that and have done this for 10 years plus are used in this collaborative effort called the Raptor Population Index. And so it's HawkWatch International, the Hawk Mountain Association Sanctuary, and Humana and Birds Canada are the four partner groups that work to create the Raptor Population Index. And we take the data from those sites and look at it just much like we looked at the sites from just the HawkWatch network alone, but you can look and see what's going on with any species, in this case, peregrine falcon, across North America. And for the most part, those trends are upwards. There's some sites that show downward trends and whatnot, but if we look at it at a map view, you can see not only do we have a good story across the West, but a pretty good story across North America in the trends for peregrine falcons. And this is from a 2014 analysis. We just finished the 2019 analysis, and we'll be putting those data out pretty soon. But notice that there's no red there. It's all either blue stable, no changes in the counts, or increasing counts. And so, again, these kinds of long-term efforts can show us when we're doing things right, too. So they're useful for that as well. In a normal year, we'd be at Chelan Ridge for a festival this upcoming weekend. This isn't a normal year, but entertaining visitors and having festivals at our sites to celebrate raptors, conservation issues, the public lands that most of our count sites are on, and how beautiful and great they are something that we really look forward to doing each year and sharing with people. Last year, we had 4,000 people plus visit one of our sites to count with us and learn about raptors, and it's something that we really love doing. And then the last thing is we couldn't have these long-term data without these folks pictured here and many like them that came before them that spent 2.5 months each fall in all sorts of conditions in a remote site for not very good compensation, collecting these long-term data while they're getting and gaining skills in outreach and raptor identification and raptor capture and handling and processing. And so just want to thank anyone, especially this group here that collected data last year, our teams that are out there this year, and anyone that spent any time at a HawkWatch International migration site or any Hawk count site anywhere. You've contributed to a long-term story that hopefully what we just talked about shows you how those data are used and how it's important. So we really appreciate all that effort. We also have to thank our partners, and we mentioned most of the big agency partners on the lands that we work at, but we also partner with a lot of different Audubon groups across the sites, a lot of different state wildlife agencies, just individuals at some sites have been part of the family at those sites for so long that they're just part of it. And if you are among that group, thank you, and we appreciate everything that you do. If you're a HawkWatch member, your membership helps run the network, and so thank you for that. We have to thank Dunkadoo. Dunkadoo is our digital data entry partner. They provide the app that lets us log our accounts digitally, which means that allows Jesse to look and see what's happening at Corpus Christi right now. It makes the day go faster and the hours and shifts shorter for our crews that use those tablets. So thanks to Dunkadoo. And then Jesse's going to tell you what's coming up next. Jesse, you're muted.
I'm muted. I might have missed it. I don't think you mentioned, but each of those sites have a Facebook group page. So that there's links that you could see on that last, let me go back. Facebook group links for each. So if you live in one of those areas or just want to follow along again in a normal season, you can do that, and we'll be posting updates, and the crew will be posting updates and cool pictures of what's going on. So I encourage you to join those. We'll let you in if you do search those on Facebook. So yeah, today we talked about kind of an introduction into hawk watching and what we do. And in the upcoming couple weeks, we're going to be focusing in on raptor identification techniques. So some basic stuff and some advanced stuff. Just talking about how you can identify the birds that you're looking at if you're at a local hawk watch or just in general watching birds and see a raptor. And then towards what we're calling the peak week, which is when generally we have the largest volumes of birds migrating, late September, early October. We will hopefully go live with Corpus Christi and Grand Canyon, and kind of have an update from the crews there. And if we're lucky, maybe they can even get on some birds and show us those through a scope. So if you liked what you heard today, we encourage you to join up in the upcoming talks, and feel free to spread the word and have people join up. Looks like Nicole put links in the chat to hawkcount.org to follow our counts and other Hawkwatch counts and find your local one, as well as links for the Facebook groups. And I think with that, we will answer some questions. I think we've had a few that have piled up. All right.
Yeah, let me go through the check. I think you mentioned at some point there was a question about banding. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, yeah.
I think we'll probably do another webinar on banding and banding data at some point, but we can talk to it briefly, speak to it.
Yeah, so banding at migration sites is kind of a standardized procedure that people who have been doing it for years and years and years have used the same process. So generally, you're located in kind of an open area where there's good visibility, and the birds that are migrating by have a lot of space to move around in. And we typically set up a live lure bird, and we call it a lure bird versus a bait bird because it's not bait for the hawk. We don't want the hawk to actually injure or capture the lure, but we want it to attract the hawk. And so I kind of like to think of it as fly fishing for birds. We have the lures that are out there, the hawks fly by, they're hungry, they see movement, and they may think it's an injured bird or something like that, and then they come in, and then we capture them in nets that are set up within the site. And so all told, that process to capture one bird could take 10 seconds to catch a bird, and then maybe 5 minutes to process the bird, put a band on it, take some measurements, and release it on its way. And Hawkwatch has banded over 100,000 of these birds, raptors, using those techniques since the mid 80s. So pretty standardized and safe technique that's used pretty broadly. And actually, I was going to mention, we have a video that was produced by Great Big Story a few years ago, and it kind of has some cool footage. It focuses in on the Goshutes, but the idea can be applied to all of our sites, and it will give you a better idea about how we catch birds, the monitoring we do, observation and education, just everything that we do. And I recommend it's only 7 minutes long. So it looks like Nicole just posted that. Feel free to watch that video and get inspired about visiting a Hawkwatch site. Let's see. Dave, is there any more questions?
Someone really like to know how I can participate. I'm a biologist that has recently moved to Utah and like to get involved and find the best way to use my skills.
Do you want me to answer that, or are you answering that?
Sure. I'll add to whatever you have to say.
Sure. Yeah, it's a great question. We love to have people get involved. We are based in Utah, but we, as you've now seen, have research that's going on throughout Western United States and some more research now throughout the world. But since you're local, particularly in Utah, right now it's a little tricky with the virus. Our office is technically closed, so we're not even generally going to the office. But I recommend looking at our website and looking at volunteer opportunities. We have lots of opportunities to volunteer on our American Kestrel project. There's some more local raptor monitoring, urban raptor type monitoring that we are doing, and we'll be ramping up and doing more so in the coming years. And Generally, again, in a normal season, we will be leading uh, tours, or that's probably not the right word, leading field trips to migration sites, and actually be doing this type of thing that we're doing today, but physically at a location where birds are actually flying overhead and talking about identification and whatnot. So that's what I recommend. We also have opportunities to be a bird docent and volunteer with our education birds. So we have a whole education department that kind of disseminates all the information that Dave and I have talked about today. It disseminates that to the public and school groups and that type of thing. And you can get involved and help take care of those birds and take them to education events and talk about HawkWatch and what goes on.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add to that is like we do have a lot of community science type opportunities in and around Utah and Salt Lake. We're growing those opportunities elsewhere. And if you live in a year where we operate our full network, if you're somewhere near one of our sites, always welcome visitors when that's a safe thing to do. And really love visitors that come a lot and can help and essentially become part of the observation crew and help with spotting birds and counting and once we know that you know what you're doing and our good hawk watcher, sometimes that enables us to let our crews have a day off, and so that extra help is always handy, um, for sure. I think we have a question that was asking about the impact of the recent fires in Oregon. So there was actually one of those fires. It's been running for a while now. I think it's like 19 or 20,000 acres last time I checked. But the closest fire in Oregon is about 5 miles away from our Bonney Butte site, and it's actually moving to the south and east, or had been. So it wasn't running towards the site, which was good to know. If we weren't not counting at Bonnie Butte because of COVID, they'd be off the mountain right now anyway because of smoke and fire risk. So yeah, when it gets bad, we have to think about the safety of our crews first and get them off. So yeah, that's the western areas. We wouldn't be counting right now for a lot of reasons in 2020. Thanks, 2020. But yeah, thanks for the question. Have anything else?
I'm not sure if we have any other questions.
I don't
And
think so.
if we don't, just a reminder to sign up for the upcoming talks and spread the word, and we hope to talk with you folks there.
You can go outside. Like this is the time of year that anyone that wants to go out, even just in your backyard, if you live near some hills, or even just like we would go out from the office at Salt Lake, and you can see birds moving south pretty much anywhere. So if you can't hit a Hawkwatch site because it's not running or there's not one near you, like you can go out and spend an hour staring at the sky and you'll be surprised at what you see. And it's a lot of fun and kind of relaxing. So anyway, I recommend it. Thanks for taking time out of your Friday afternoon to join us to hear about the network and migration monitoring and what we found. And we hope to see you again at another seminar.